Today, we are diving into a story that really pushes the absolute limits of what humans can endure. It's a story that starts with a horrific plane crash in a frozen wasteland and ends with a question that's almost impossible to answer, a question about what it truly means to survive.
So let's start with just one number, 72. That's how many days the survivors of Uruguayan Air Force Flight 571 were stranded, completely alone in the Andes Mountains. 72 days. It's a number that frames this entire, almost unbelievable story of human will against absolutely impossible odds. Okay, so our story kicks off, like so many disasters do, with what should have been a totally routine flight. But it took a catastrophic turn, plunging 45 people into an immediate fight for their lives. Picture this. It's October 13th, 1972. A chartered plane is carrying a Uruguayan rugby team along with their friends and family, 45 people in all, on their way to Santiago, Chile. After a bad weather delay, they take off again, flying right into the vast and, as they would soon find out, treacherous Andes mountain range. Now, the pilots thought they were in the clear. They believed they'd already passed the highest peaks, so they started their descent. But they had made a fatal miscalculation. As the plane broke through the clouds, everyone on board saw it at the same time. A sudden, terrifying realization. They were flying straight into the side of a mountain. In a moment of pure panic, the pilots yanked the plane up, but it was just too late. The tail of the plane smashed into a mountain ridge, literally tearing the entire back section clean off. Just seconds later, the left wing was sheared away. The rest of the plane, just the front part of the fuselage, became this horrifying metal toboggan, shooting down a glacier at over 350 kilometers per hour before finally, violently crashing to a stop. And somehow, in what can only be described as an absolute miracle, after all that unimaginable violence, crashing at over 3,500 meters, 33 of the 45 people on board were still alive. But their ordeal, well, it had only just begun. So the immediate shock of the crash, that raw, terrifying moment, soon faded into a new and in some ways slower kind of horror. Stranded, injured, and totally cut off from the world, the survivors started what they thought would be a short wait for rescue. They figured it was just a day or two away. You know, it's amazing how quickly their resourcefulness kicked in. Two medical students, Roberto Canessa and Gustavo Zerbino, they immediately started taking care of the wounded. The whole group worked to seal up the broken fuselage to create a shelter from the biting cold. They even came up with this brilliant way to melt snow for water using a sheet of metal. And they laid out suitcases in the snow to form a giant cross, a desperate signal to any planes flying overhead. And for 11 long days, their hope was kept alive by the sight of search planes in the sky. Can you imagine? They'd see them and they'd scream, they'd wave, they did absolutely everything they could to get noticed, but the white plane was perfectly camouflaged against the endless white snow. The planes just flew right past them, again and again, completely oblivious.
The real spirit-breaking moment, though, came on day 11. One of the survivors, he actually managed to get a little transistor radio working. And as they all huddled around it, shivering from the cold, they heard the news. The official search for their plane had been called off. The world had given them up for dead. Their hearts were just completely broken.
At this point, their tiny food supply, we're talking a few chocolate bars, some jam, a couple bottles of wine, it was long gone. They were at an altitude where absolutely nothing grows and no animals live. They were starving to death. And they were faced with a dreadful, unthinkable question. They were forced to confront the absolute unthinkable. The only source of protein, the only thing that could keep them alive, were the bodies of their friends and teammates who had died in the crash. After days of agonizing debate, they made a pact. If they died, they gave the others permission to use their bodies for survival. And just when you think, okay, it cannot possibly get any worse, on day 16, it did. As they were sleeping in the fuselage, an avalanche came roaring down the mountain, burying them completely. 8 more people were killed instantly. It left only 19 survivors, trapped under the snow for 3 agonizing days before they could finally dig their way out. That avalanche, that was it. That was the final straw. The survivors knew, without a doubt, that waiting at the crash site was a death sentence. Their only hope, their only chance, was to walk out. And so, they began a final, desperate gamble for their lives. But here's the thing, and it's just absolutely heartbreaking. They were working with a fatal piece of misinformation. Right before the crash, the pilot had said they were over Curacao, Chile, so they had to believe that the green valleys of Chile were just a short walk to the west. The devastating reality? They were 89 kilometers to the east, deep in the remote heart of the Argentinian Andes.
So on December 12th, a full 2 months after the crash, the 3 strongest survivors, Nando Parrado, Roberto Canessa, and Antonio Vizintin, they just set out. They had no gear, no map, zero experience. By day 4, they realized their small supply of food wasn't going to be enough for all 3 of them. So Vizintin, in this incredible act of heroism, turned back to the crash site, leaving his food for Parrado and Canessa.
After days of just torturous climbing, they finally reached what they thought was the last peak. Parrado looked over, fully expecting to see the green fields of Chile. And instead, he was met with an endless 360-degree view of more snow-covered mountains. Just mountains, as far as the eye could see. It was a soul-crushing sight, but he just refused to give up. Even after that crushing realization, Parrado and Canessa just kept going. For 10 days, they hiked through this treacherous, frozen landscape. All in all, they covered an astonishing 61 kilometers, and they were fueled by nothing more than just sheer, unbelievable will to live.
And right here, after all that darkness and despair, this is where the story finally takes a turn. This is when desperation gives way to hope, as the world prepares to learn that the impossible had happened.
After 9 days of walking, they started seeing the first signs of civilization. And then, on the other side of a raging river, they spotted him, a man on a horse. They were too far away to shout, but the man came back the next day. Parrado scribbled a note, tied it to a rock, and threw it across the water. It read, "I come from a plane that fell in the mountains. We need help urgently." That farmer, a man named Sergio Catalan, he rode for 10 hours to get help. And on December 22nd, 70 days after the crash, Chilean Air Force helicopters, with Nando Parrado himself as their guide, finally located the fuselage. When it was all said and done, 16 people were rescued. They were suffering from altitude sickness, dehydration, frostbite, malnutrition, broken bones, but they were alive. They had survived 72 days in the Andes.
So what do we take away from this? This incredible story is more than anything a testament to the absolute limits of human endurance. It shows you the power of ingenuity and teamwork when you're staring death in the face. But I think most of all, it's just a profound story about hope, about patience, and about the unbreakable will to live, even when everything seems lost. And it really leaves us all with one final, haunting question to think about. If you were faced with the same impossible circumstances, how far would you go to survive?